auctioneer will cast to the general public the 50 people standing there and say, who will bid first? Who is the bravest amongst you to fight for this property? When that gets dropped on the crowd, 9 out of 10 times you get silence. Now, the reason you get silence is because nobody wants to be the first. Because if you do go first and your bid is perceived as too low, too high, whatever it might be, you fear the judgment of the other 49 people standing in the crowd.
True.
That's primarily, it gets worse when you get to the tail end of the auction.
Faye and panic, I know, this time,
And
see today my news you need to have along the way. Welcome to Conversations with Faye. I'm your host, Faye Waterman, and today we're going to dive into the world of property, the art of auctions. My guest, Garry McPherson, a well-respected buyer's advocate with many years' experience in the world of real estate. If you're a first-timer in the property market, whether buying or selling, or an investor looking for some new insights, Garry has some fantastic tips and strategies for you to negotiate the process. Today's episode will give you the confidence and knowledge to make informed decisions no matter where you are in the property market. So stay tuned to hear what our expert has to say. I'm Faye Waterman, your host of Conversations with Faye, and my guest today is Garry McPherson, and Garry is a property advocate. And today our topic is going to be auctions.
auction, it's gotta love a good auction fight.
Do you? Look, what's scary about an auction? What's not scary about an auction? And how do people really deal with them emotionally and intelligently?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I'll start off with your first question. What's scary about an auction and what's not scary about an auction? For the most part, we don't go to auctions every week, right? It's something that's right out of the norm. It's something that a lot of people need to gear themselves up for. Mentally, emotionally, all that sort of stuff. And I suppose that gearing up and that stepping out of your comfort zone is what brings a lot of fear in the fold there. It's not really scary for me.
Oh, yes, but you've been doing it for a long time. But when someone
Yeah.
is either selling their house and it's going to auction,
Mm-hmm.
or someone's coming to buy a house that's in an auction,
Yeah.
it can be pretty scary and,
Okay.
and tense time for people.
It can be, and you're 100% correct. Imagine this: even though we're all outgoing in life, and we have friends and family, etc., very few of us like to do things like public speaking.
Scariest thing ever.
Apparently so. More scary than death, I don't know so much. I prefer to talk than die. That being said, a lot of people won't do public speaking, and the reason they don't do public speaking is because when they stand on the podium in front of a group of people, the first thought is not about the content, more about the judgment.
What do you mean by more about the judgment, not about the content?
People are looking at you. When you're standing on a podium, people are looking at you,
Yeah.
and they're assessing you for the way that you talk, the way you present yourself, how you dress,
True.
all the other bits and pieces. Well, this is what goes through the mind of most presenters, most novice presenters. It's about whether or not the crowd will accept them for who they are, etc., before they even get to the content of what they're delivering.
Exactly. True. They make a judgment as soon as they see you.
Correct. So people, when they are public speaking, fear more the judgment and the assessment of self than they do the judgment assessment of content. That's just my experience. Now, if you take that analogy and you apply it to auction, you're standing in a street with, on a good day, maybe 50 strangers. People you don't know, people who theoretically mean very little to you. However, they're the general public, they're the gallery. And you have a very confident auctioneer that stands up the front and lauds the property and tells you the story of the area and the history of the house and how it's the most amazing thing that's ever existed on the planet Earth. And then that auctioneer will cast to the general public the 50 people standing there and say, who will bid first? Who is the bravest amongst you? And they don't say it like that, but who is the bravest amongst you to fight for this property?
And they imply it though, don't they?
It's the implication. Now, when that gets dropped on the crowd, 9 out of 10 times you get silence. Now, the reason you get silence is because nobody wants to be the first. Because if you do go first and your bid is perceived as too low, too high, whatever it might be, you fear the judgment of the other 49 people standing in the crowd.
True.
That's primarily, it gets worse when you get to the tail end of the auction.
But you see, when that person bids first,
Yes.
you do have the eyes of all the other people on you.
Correct.
And you feel like everyone's looking at me because I've made the first bid. Did I do the right thing?
Correct.
So they question themselves and they doubt themselves.
It's exactly right. It gets worse the longer the auction goes on, because if you're one of the tail end bidders and you're fighting it out with one or two other parties, you're effectively saying, this is me, this is what I have, this is my personal wealth, and I'm putting it all on the line to secure this home. Nobody wants to be the second bidder in a fight for the home because they fear the judgment of the crowd. Oh, that person didn't have enough money, or they just weren't good enough, or they didn't quite make it at the end of the day. And there's a lot of stress and tension associated with that. Secondarily, if you really, really want the house and you're fighting against somebody else publicly, because let's face it, it's a public battle.
I've been there, done that.
Uh-huh.
It was the scariest thing I ever did.
At what point? Really?
Yeah, it was. It was really scary. For me, it was. Because I had no backup. I was just there by myself.
Yeah, I can understand. It's that sense of heightened tension at the tail end of an auction where you're battling it out publicly with somebody else for something that you really want, and you're exhausting the wealth that you have publicly, that causes all of that anxiety. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, all of that stuff goes to the side. At the end of the day, it's the thought coming up to that before you even start going to the auction of having to go through that event that causes fear and a little bit of trepidation.
So when all those people are standing there and most of them are not going to bid anyway, they're there as onlookers.
Correct.
And they're just interested in who's going to buy the property and how much it's going to sell for. Curiosity, we're all curious and we all want to know, particularly if we live around the area, as to how much a property is going to sell for. It has a price set on it, but is it going to go a long way or a little way above that price? And they usually do in an auction. There's a lot of emotion there, isn't there?
Huge amounts. The whole thing is based on emotion.
And it's, your intelligence is pretty low when you're high emotion. So you're not really thinking straight because you think about, I want this house. How much money have I got? How much can I actually spend? Can I get a little bit more if I don't have enough? Does all this sort of stuff go through their minds?
I'm going to talk a little bit about neuroscience here. So if we looked at the mind as having three levels, the base level that basically worries about whether we fight or whether we flight, whether we need to feed, just the basic stuff. We have a mid-level brain that deals in emotion. That is, for the majority of instances, where most of our decisions are made. Then we have the top brain, the biggest part of our brain, that deals with, it's the logic center. It deals with all the mathematics and the sense and what's right and what's wrong in a very cold, neo-logical manner. When we're at auction, it's that midbrain that's doing the bidding. That big brain, the neocortex that's trying to do all the calculations, is getting smashed by the mammalian brain in the middle. Because as much as you sit there and you know that it's not worth X, your emotions are telling you that you have to have it. And emotions override logic.
Oh, they do.
Until you get to a point where you're that far past where you should be, that the logic center kicks in and you
Can it be too late? I mean, when you've committed,
many times.
There's many people that will bid over and above what they were going to do, whether they have the money or not. What's the commitment once you've bid and there's no other bidders and they go inside and they talk to the vendors and they come out and say it's sold? Or
when you look at the system of an auction, so this is moving from the emotion back into the cold hard facts of the way an auction runs. You've got the agent that will stand out the front and tell you all the stories of the house. They'll look for an opening bid. Let's suggest they get one and we're on. They'll bid away. They won't use the phrase it's on the market until they've reached the vendor's reserve. And in most instances, they still won't use those terms.
Why not?
Well, if you say that it's on the market, you then shorten the range of final bids past that.
Right, okay.
If you don't announce it on the market as a selling agent, then people will still bid emotionally against one another and drive the price up as far as they physically can. When you think you're close to the end, you stop pushing as hard as you do. So instead of $10,000 bids, they become $1,000 bids. So as a selling agent, you want people to think that the finish line is far further than what it is. They'll take the bids. In an instance where the auction slows and stalls, the agents will do what we refer to in the industry as the halftime break. And
Is there a halftime break?
Look, we've been conditioned, especially in the Victorian market, we've been conditioned that halftime breaks exist. No halftime break, no sale. Now, it sounds completely...
That increases the tension of the people that are bidding.
Correct. So what it does is the agent will say, we're at a point now where we have a bid, first, second, third and final. We all said we're all done. Give me a moment, I'll go confer with my vendor. Now, at that point in time, they'll head in and they'll have a chat to the vendor. If we're at a point where we can get a sale away as a selling agent, we'll say, okay, we've reached our reserve, we're ready to put it on the market. I'm going to go back out and announce that it's on the market, and then people will panic and the last minute flurry of bids will come. If it hasn't reached the vendor's reserve, the agent will go in and say to the vendor, we're stalled at this point. I know your reserve was here. Let's look at bringing it back a little bit if you really want to sell. So it's that halftime break is used as a leverage point for not only the crowd, but also for the seller.
Okay, and what if the seller's really stuck on the price and they're not going to drop it regardless of whether they sell or not?
Then they don't drop it. They're referred to as testing the market.
Right. Okay.
So you'll hear an agent say, my vendor is not testing the market, they're here to sell. That means that they're at a point where they want to sell.
But they're not going to give it away.
But they will get to a point where they're flexible. If they don't use those words, if they say, my vendor's here today for a fair and reasonable price, the vendor's fairly fixed on their price.
Okay.
Now, let's suggest that the vendor is fixed on their price and they stay. Well, then the agent goes back out and says, we're not at reserve yet. Let's work towards getting reserve. Or if the vendor comes back a little bit, the agent runs outside and says, we're so close, let's go.
Okay. So that increases the tension, the emotion, and everything else.
Correct.
Within the crowd.
Yep.
Those bidders and the crowd themselves become more interested in what's going on.
Yep. The most effective thing for a real estate agent to do after a halftime break is to come back, provided they're close enough to reserve or they're at reserve, right? Or the reserves come back to meet that last bid. The most effective thing for an agent to do is they'll walk back out onto the street and they'll say, ladies and gentlemen, point to the person that made their last bid, say, sir, ma'am, I'd like you to confirm your last bid is 1.275 million. It's confirmed, yes, we're officially on the market selling. We are now playing for keeps. Now, everybody else in the auction space then...
It's like a game, isn't it?
Of course it's a game. The whole thing's, but it's a system.
It's a system?
So, ignore it as a game, look at it as a system.
Okay.
All right. Now, once you understand the system and the steps, you can hack it.
So when you go to auction, what's it best to do? So you find an agent, and because you want to sell your house.
Yes.
And they suggest you go to auction, not private sale.
Depending on the market.
Depending on the market. And then maybe you find someone such as yourself, a buyer's advocate.
Correct.
To support you and give you the information that you actually need that the real estate agent won't give you.
Yeah.
So that you've got the right information and you know that someone's got your back when you're selling, not being pressured by the real estate agent to sell.
That's a vendor's advocate.
Vendor's advocate.
What you're talking about there.
Right.
So,
okay.
From a sales point of view, if you had a vendor advocate with you, the vendor advocate will do the research on the agent, appoint the agent, and work in conjunction with the agent for the sale of the house.
Okay.
They'll sit, if you're looking at positioning, they sit between you as the vendor and the sales agent. So that when it comes to that halftime break, because that's where your vendor advocate is crucial. When it comes to that halftime break and the vendor advocate, the selling agent comes back in and says, look, we're at 1.2, I know you wanted 1.25, but if you come back to 1.2, we should be able to get that extra 50 under competition. I suggest you bring it back. And you as a vendor are really, really wanting that 1.25, your vendor advocate will step in and say, hey, agent, I understand where we are. We did discuss this prior. You're well and truly understanding that we want this number. We need this number as a mandatory minimum. You've suggested that you can get it, told us that that's what you can do, so go out and do it. Now, that's a really easy conversation for a vendor advocate to have. It's a very difficult conversation for a seller to have when they're staring down the barrel of a sale and they're only $50,000 away.
Do they get a bit toey, do they?
Who, the
the seller.
Yeah, vendors always get. Think about it. We call a home our asset. It's whether
most of the time we look at that as our asset because there's not a lot of other things unless you're extremely wealthy.
Well, an asset is something. Yeah, an asset is something that makes you money.
Yeah.
So if you bought it for a low price and you're selling it at a higher price, it's an asset.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're going to effectively liquidate the asset and make money on it on the way through. Now, when you've got your primary asset up for sale and you're looking to maximize its sale price because you only get to sell it once and you're at a point where you're $50,000 away on $1.2 million, that's a lot of pressure.
I've been on both sides, actually. Both sides of an auction, selling.
A calm environment like this, it's an easier thing to suggest that we have the confidence and the capability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
In an environment where if you look at it from cold hard numbers point, there are a lot of houses out there that would have been bought for $300,000 that 20 years later are worth $1.3 million. Now, you have a check in hand for $950,000 net, or you can hold on for your million and maybe miss. Do you risk 950 on 50 or do you execute? Now that's the first question. The second question is, what are you doing with that 950? Is it your retirement nest egg? Is it your trip around the world? Is it your new sports car? Is it whatever it might be?
It might be another new home.
Might be a new home.
Yeah.
But the second you translate that dollar figure into an actual item and you start to own that item in your mind, the loss of that item or items or experiences or etc. weighed up against that, and 50 is a lot of money, but it's a small amount, becomes a very difficult thing. Now we're sitting here and we're just discussing it.
We're not involved, actually involved.
Can you imagine being in the middle of it, under high tension, right, and sitting there and thinking about all those things that you can have that you're now going to miss out on? Just the tension of that environment is enough for you to make a decision that would be different to the decision that you'll make sitting here. And that's
true, because we're not in that emotional state.
Correct. And that's precisely why agents love auctions.
I've seen one place just around here that's been up for auction, private sale, up for auction, private sale, up for auction, private sale, and it just keeps going backwards and forwards.
Different agents?
Different agents.
Okay, so, but an agent will come to you and tell you that they'll get you what you want. So let's suggest you want 1.5. They'll say, yes, no worries, we'll get 1.6. And you think, this is wonderful, I want my 1.6.
Yeah, so they up it so that they can get the same. It's
referred to as buying a listing. So you overpromise and you underdeliver.
Instead of under-promising and over-delivering.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
So these are the nuances of an auction campaign setup, but we'll go into that at a later point.
Okay.
The reality of the situation is that an auction is designed as a public performance, designed to heighten emotional tension. It's designed to make decisions that you wouldn't normally make. Right? It's really that simple.
Do you get really stubborn sellers? Yeah.
And they don't sell their homes.
And they don't sell their homes, and they keep trying and doing all that sort of stuff. But yeah.
So agent A buys the listing, fails. Agent B comes along and says, I can get it for you, fails. Agent C comes along and says, I can get it for you, fails. What that tells you is that the price point that they're marketing the property at
is not realistic?
Correct. So the market will always, I mean, this is a harsh reality, but it's a truth. The market will always tell you what your place is worth. Doesn't matter what they quote it at, they'll always tell you what it's worth.
Regardless of how emotional or how attached you are to the place, you have to accept reality.
Correct. Well, reality, it's no matter whether you have to accept it or not. Reality is reality.
Yeah, well, it is. So therefore you just give up?
No. Therefore what you do is before you start, you determine value.
Okay, and really make it so that the person that's selling the house really understands this is how it works.
Correct.
That's a really frank conversation that you have to have.
It has to be had.
How many people accept that? Because, you know, there's a lot of emotion when they go to sell their house. There's a lot of memories and things within a place if they've been there for 40 or 50 years.
How do I put this without sounding a little bit predatory?
Just say it.
Okay. Very simple. You're selling, I'll use you as an example. You're selling your home, you believe it's worth $1 million.
Yeah.
Right? You go and see an agent, the agent has a look at it. The agent knows it's worth 900. They're given two options at that point in time. Option A, tell you they'll get $1 million, get you to spend $10,000 on marketing and advertising, take it to market, test the market and realise it's only worth 900 and hope that A, you'll come back to the 900, or B, some fool out there will pay $1 million because they've just decided they like it. They're taking that chance with your money because it doesn't cost the agent to market, it costs you to market.
Because you're paying for it.
Marketing is always paid for. Option 2 as an agent is I look at where you think the value is. I look at where the market is, and I say to you, quite frankly, Faye, everything in this area is sold at 900. Everything that is comparable to you is at 900. The market clearly demonstrates 900. Now, I can list it at 9 and we can sell it at 9, or I can list it at 950 to $1 million. We can hope that the right buyer comes along, but if we list too high, we won't get the traction and we won't get the sale. The choice is entirely up to you. I can cast the die and try and make the win, or we can go at it from a more realistic point of view and trust that the market will upswing us to the higher number.
Yeah.
That's now your call. That's not the agent's call.
So with an auction, let's sum it up with the auction.
Yeah.
You decide to go to an auction. What's the benefit of an auction as opposed to a private sale?
Auctions need to be run in specific markets. So what we need to be looking at with an auction is a market where there is limited supply, your house stands out from other houses, a market that's driven by buyers at the moment, so the fear of missing out, the need to get in, these sorts of instances that drive a need to purchase.
Right.
So when you've got a need, you've got competition. When you've got competition, you've got an auction. So if it's a seller's market, always take it to auction. If I was selling my house and it was a seller's market, depending on, look, if you had a farm in the middle of Gippsland where you've realistically got 1 or 2 buyers that are ever going to come through,
yeah,
don't take it to auction, because you'll get one person at auction. If you're lucky, you'll get none sometimes. And an auction that gets zero traction sends a very clear message to the market about the property.
There'll be a lot of well-educated people out there selling and buying.
Yes. Well,
and there are other people that aren't, that go to auction, don't really understand it. What do you suggest for them to do if they're deciding to sell their place? What do they need to look for? What do they need to understand? Who do they need to talk to so that they can get honest information? Who can they trust? Then take it to market.
Really very easy. We have as a seller, we have the tools available now to do our own assessments.
Right.
So if I was taking a property to auction, the first thing I would do is I would go to the, and I use REA, realestate.com, because the majority of the listings go through there digitally. And they're good enough to have sold listings as well as listings for sale. I would go to, let's say I had a 3-bedroom home in Brighton.
Right.
And I wanted to see what a 3-bedroom home in Brighton was worth. I'd go to realestate.com, I'd go to the sold section, I'd key in the parameters, 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, land size 500 square metres, last 12 months. Hit go, and it'll come up with all of the properties that meet that criteria that have been sold in the last 12 months by date and what they've got. You then get a list of properties that are closest to yours,
right,
most recent sales, and through a little bit of the magic of math, you'll be able to work out roughly what your place is worth.
Okay.
So now you know what your place is worth.
Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Stay inspired, stay connected, and join our amazing community today.